Lady in White. This is my first ever Reddit post. I think because this is a story that has stuck with me for decades, and despite the number of times I've told it, no one has ever had a similar experience. In Glen Falls, New York, my entire extended family were visiting my grandfather's brother for a long weekend. His property backed up to the Hudson River, with a lot of open field, mowed grass with garden beds, that led into a forest with a few paths that were about a half-mile walk to the river. He did have neighbors, but only a few that were only about a half-football field away. One of the nights we were there, all of the adults were having fun and talking around a fire up closer to the house, away from the forest, while my cousins and I played a tag game called Ghost in the Graveyard. As I quietly jogged away from the adults, looking for my brothers and cousins, and the adults' boisterous conversation fading well into the distance, I began to slow and walk towards the woods and the paths that led to the river. Just as I began to get within eyesight of the fuzzy, darkened trail outlets, I slowed to a walk so I wouldn't be heard. And then, in the close distance, I suddenly see a light-haired woman emerge from the path on the right. I freeze. I know it's a woman I'm looking at, but as she walks out from the path, she is completely unaware of my presence, as well as the presence of the adults far off in the background, loudly having a good time. Her strides in her long white dress are flowing and elegant, almost appearing not to touch the ground as she steps, and her dress gracefully sways with each step. Her hair appears long and blonde, and her head is held high with an undeterred gaze forward. Then, as soon as she appears, she fades into the next path on the left and disappears. It was a moment that lasted for years, but was over in just 10 beautiful steps. Moments after she disappeared, undistracted, a group of my cousins, loud and yelling, emerged from the path on the right. I calmly asked them, "Did you see a woman back on the trail?" They laughingly answered, "No." Decades later, I still can't cooperate, convince myself, or confirm what I saw. But as long as it's been, it still doesn't match the time I felt pass while I stood and watched a lady in white. Creepy encounter and more. So I've been thinking about this encounter for a while, and there's this one hill that creeps me the fuck out, especially at night. The hill's in a town called Ravenna, located in New York. I went to this abandoned house situated on that hill. Now, when I entered the house, it was maybe 45 degrees outside, which isn't warm, but it was super humid. But the moment I entered it, I felt like I was freezing. I felt like someone left the air conditioner running for hours on end. Now, I'm something that's called a sensitive. It's like a medium, except I can't see the spirits, but I can feel their presence. I feel blind, from my understanding. Now, when I say this house felt hostile, I mean it felt hostile. I felt watched from one room in particular. If I was standing in the kitchen, If you go straight, there's 2 rooms at the end of the hall. I felt watched from that area, but couldn't pinpoint where in particular. Now, this house looked like a tornado tore through it. The floor was rotten and partially missing. There was paint chips everywhere, among other things, and generally just not the best looking. I remember that house being built and seeing someone move into it, but when I went in, there were belongings everywhere. Think of Chernobyl. It's as if they up and left suddenly and randomly. I even found an envelope with a name on it. Can't remember the name, but I eventually found the kids' room and found a kid's toy, which immediately gave me a shiver and goosebumps the moment I touched it and realized what it was. Once the house felt extremely angry, or whatever, I left. And as I was leaving and walking back down the hill, all I could see on my left side is a blur that comes to a sudden and abrupt stop, which immediately caught my attention, and the blur was white. But I couldn't make out any details. I just knew it was pissed and was glaring at me. The town's about 250 years old. And as for where the creature was, it was near the wooden section, which was located pretty close to the house. But I noticed the figure and crossed the road to the other side and refused to go back until I came out onto the main road. In a separate session, I heard footsteps, like boots, come from the attic. I heard a metallic clang, which I was unable to debunk as a pipe issue or me kicking something. And there was a plastic chair in there and felt colder than cold. Outside it was probably around 30 degrees, but inside it felt like it was a solid 20. I also found a pair of antique cutlery in the entrance to the basement. A spoon and a fork mainly. An old flame. Nothing beats having an awesome roommate, especially one who happens to be a good buddy and maintains clean habits. Kyle inhaled deeply, appreciating the smell of freshly mopped floor and lemon pledge. "Hey, Jordan, what's the occasion? The place is spotless. You expecting a lady friend later tonight?" Kyle asked, carefully placing his shoes on the shoe rack. "I'll try not to make a mess if that's the case." "No, actually, someone was here looking for you. She said she wanted to talk," Jordan said. Kyle sat on the living room recliner. "Oh, yeah? Who's she? And did she say what she wants?" Jordan didn't seem to hear the question. Kyle roughly tapped Jordan's headset. "You know, for being so absorbed in your Call of Duty, shouldn't you be beating the noobs? Did you hear what I asked you?" He eyed Jordan impatiently. "Oh, yeah, sorry. I invited her to come in, saying you'd be back soon, but she took off. Said she'd come back later. I think she said her name was Tiffany?" Jordan said, without looking away from the TV. Kyle walked into the kitchen, a puzzled look on his face. "Don't know a Tiffany, or why she'd want to talk. Are you sure that was her name? What'd she look like?" Jordan looked away from the TV for a moment. The kill cam replayed on the screen. "Come on, dude. I was on a kill streak," he said. "Anyway, she's a fairly tall, long blonde hair, a few freckles on her left cheek, bit of a hooked nose." Kyle stopped. "Did you say her name was Tiffany? Did you mean Tanya?" "Yeah, Tanya. That's right. She wanted to talk to you. Any idea about what?" Jordan asked. Kyle's face sunk. She's an old flame. We once made a promise we'd be together forever. He paused and sighed. I guess she found me again. Pack your bags. Pack light and fast. We need to leave. Now. Jordan put the controller down. Why? Is she some crazy stalker or something? No, it's nothing like that. We never actually split up. Kyle's voice trailed off. Then what happened? Jordan asked. Did you walk out on her one night or something? No, Kyle replied. She died. A phantom lurking around in my Chelsea office. Years ago, I worked in the Chelsea neighborhood of Manhattan, and to the best of my knowledge, the building in question didn't have any supernatural or paranormal history. But it's New York City, so who knows? And I've never had any kind of paranormal experience either. I'm not even sure if I would classify the following account as such. Instead, I've mentally filed the experience away as something weird that happened to me a few years ago. Back then, I worked in a hybrid building, so apartments and offices alike coexisted under the same roof. My particular workspace was divided up into a series of small offices, a common area, and a section in the back where my boss stayed when he was in the city. It's an area I called the living quarters. The company was small and the culture was loose, since different employees worked internationally. We were allowed to make our own hours as long as we were all responsible with work output and keeping up with goals and milestones. I prefer to work early, very early, as in starting at 6:30 in the morning and leaving at 3:30 in the afternoon. Needless to say, I'm alone in the office for several hours a week. The particular morning in question, my boss was traveling in Europe, and no one else was in yet except for me. Outside my door was the large common area where 4 towering floor-to-ceiling windows open the north-facing wall to a view of the city. The morning sun started peeking over the skyline. The time was probably somewhere between 7 to 8:30 in the morning. As I was typing emails at my computer, I saw a figure move from the corner of my eye, coming from the direction of the living quarters. The figure walked through the common area, past the windows, and into my boss's personal office. I was startled because I thought I was alone. But on more than one occasion, my boss allowed his friends to stay in the living quarters without letting the employees know. We've been surprised before by these unexpected guests. Hello? I said. No one answered, and my heartbeat increased. I stood up, walked into the common area, and approached the door of the office the figure walked into. It was shut. I really didn't want to open it to see what was going on within, but my curiosity got the better of me. I knocked. Hello? I said again. There was no response. After some hesitation, I started to twist the knob. It didn't budge. Locked. The door was locked. I jostled the knob a bit to be sure, but it didn't move. My eyes went wide. I turned around and walked back to the living quarters. Both bedrooms were empty. The beds were made and untouched, and there wasn't a single piece of luggage to be found anywhere. After standing there in absolute surprise for a few minutes, I realized there wasn't much to be done. So I went back to my desk and continued to work as if nothing happened. I didn't share the experience with anyone. I assumed I'd just be met with eye rolls and, "Wow, that's so weird," remarks. I didn't feel threatened at all, just a little disturbed. Sometime later, my coworker mentioned that at times the workplace was unbearably creepy, and he didn't know how I could spend as much time as I did in it, alone. I said that not only did I not mind it, but I actually preferred it. This finally prompted me to share my story, and I delivered it in the most matter-of-fact way possible. My coworker was quiet after I finished, a rarity for him. Then he told me that it's funny I mentioned something spooky, because one morning when he was there early and alone, one of the rare times he made it in before me, he noticed that a rolling coat rack where my boss stored his suits was in the common area. My coworker assumed one of the unannounced guests put it there, which again wasn't uncommon. But out of the corner of his eye, he noticed the suits moving, as if they were being slowly sorted and looked through. We shared the same office, so he had the exact view of the common area that I did. And like me, he called out, "Hello?" But there was no reply, so he stood up to inspect the rack. No one was there. He, too, went into the living quarters, but he only found empty rooms with still-made beds and no sign of luggage. Somewhat recently, I was yet again in the office early and alone. As I walked toward the kitchen, from the corner of my eye, I saw a figure standing in the doorway, leading to the living quarters. But when I turned to look with my full vision, no one was there. This time, however, I didn't bother investigating. I already knew the answer I'd find. Grabbed and spoken to while out of town. On February 17th, I traveled to Olympia, Washington for business and stayed 2 nights in the Doubletree Hilton there. On the very first night, I had an experience that I can't shake. Due to rental car, traffic, and weather, I didn't end up arriving at my hotel until about 9 p.m., and after only having a trail mix packet to eat since breakfast, I ended up going to the hotel bar and having dinner and 1 beer. I say 1, so no one thinks I was intoxicated. I ordered my food and sipped my beer while I texted my wife to let her know I had gotten through the weather safely to my hotel. Around 10 p.m., I went to my room and turned on the TV for some background noise while I unpacked. Rambo 3 was on while I changed into some sleepwear. I ended up turning the lights out at around 10:45 and dozed off quickly after a long day of travel. The next thing I knew, I opened my eyes and was facing the hotel alarm clock on the nightstand, which read 3:06 a.m. I had been lying on my right side near the edge of the bed, and out of the corner of my eye to the left, I saw someone or something move at the foot of the bed. I was extremely startled and turned my head to look directly at it. In nearly an instant, this tall, dark figure was next to me, leaning over me. It was difficult to estimate how tall it was because I was lying down. In an older woman's voice, I heard it say 3 letters very clearly. O-B-S. and almost immediately after stating these letters, the first time, I felt a firm grip on my left arm, and it repeated the letters louder and more sternly, with a bit of a pause between them. O, B, S. At this point, I threw the covers off and back-skirted to the opposite side of the bed to turn the lamp on. Once the lights were on, I didn't see anyone in my room. I looked around the room to see if there was any evidence of someone else being there, but came up empty-handed. I also looked at my arm where I had been grabbed and didn't see anything. Needless to say, I didn't sleep again that night. I keep going over this experience in my head and can't help but wonder if there was a purpose for it. The tone in which the letters were spoken were almost disciplinarian. The voice sounded agitated or frustrated, like I was a child who had been misinterpreting something my mother was saying. The letters themselves don't mean anything to me. I have experienced a number of things in my life that I consider paranormal, though it has been a couple of years. But this is the first time I have been touched. It was quite unsettling. I know posting something like this on a public forum is to invite public scrutiny, but I'm hoping someone else who reads this can at least identify with what happened here, and or may be able to shed some light on the potential meaning behind such an encounter. So I wrote down and called the hotel today, February 29th, and spoke with the assistant manager. I asked if any paranormal experiences had been reported at their hotel, and she seemed reluctant to answer. After I assured her I did not wish to file any complaints, report any injuries, or even have my story on any sort of permanent record, she lightened up and said no complaints of a paranormal nature had been observed there. She did, however, share some light of her own frightening personal experience from years ago. Not from the hotel, though. She was very nice, but unfortunately unable to shed any light on my story.